That's awesome. Gavin.
Good morning, guys.
Hey, Bob.
Morning.
Hey, good
Morning,
morning.
all.
Morning.
Chuck. Hi, Cindy.
Sorry to report that the skies are not red or orange again.
Yeah.
Is
I was
anybody in Portland
I don't know if we
on
have
our,
anybody.
on our call? I heard it's getting really rough in Portland right now
My
with
goodness.
respect to the fires.
I was on a call with Laura from 99 Designs, and she's in San Fran, and it was just eerie to see her background and the orange sky. It looked like a movie set. It looked so surreal.
Yeah, same.
Up here in Vancouver, we're getting smoked out. So all the smoke traveling up that far was really blocked right. The skies were really gray and kind of closed off in the last 2 days.
Wow.
Same in LA. It's super smoky here.
Yeah.
2020. Woohoo!
I'm sorry. The suffering should not. Everybody should suffer. My daughter's quote I thought was my favorite. She said, "It looks like the day the dinosaurs died." And I'm like, yes.
Hey, Brandon, can I do a quick shout out? Because I see Oren is on the call, and I just introduced Oren to John last week, so it's his first call.
Please do. Yeah. Hi, Oren.
Thanks, son.
Welcome. Yeah, we're just letting more people pile in here. As you can see, I am not John, and John is not going to be on the call today. I looked far and wide for a cool hat to wear, but I didn't have any luck. So he is, Brian. John is bow hunting in Wyoming with his dad, which is pretty cool. So he may join us, but he wasn't sure what kind of reception he was going to get. So yeah, we had crazy weather here in Colorado. We went from the smoky skies, ash falling on the ground, 95 degrees, and then 24 hours later it was 30 degrees and snowing, and we had a few inches of snow on the ground yesterday and it was that heavy wet snow that catches all the leaves and breaks all the branches. So the power was out, and I was freaking out yesterday. I was trying to talk to Catherine and John, and I didn't have any internet, and I'm kind of like stressing, and I turn around and I see my son with his little pod group we have here at the house doing homeschooling, and they've got no power on, and they're just using pencils and paper, and they're just getting their work done. And, yeah, I was like, maybe something to this. So
our neighborhood looked like Armageddon around here.
Yeah.
There's so many trees down and branches down, and people's driveways. People couldn't get out of their driveways because of all the debris.
Good week to be in the tree business here in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll kick it off. We've got about 45 folks joined so far. So as I mentioned, John's out of town. He's with his dad bow hunting in Wyoming. He may jump in, but may not. So we're just Catherine and I are gonna run the show here today, and feel free to jump in and speak whenever you have something to say. So I'm sure this won't be as exciting as when John's on the phone, but I'll do my best. So we're going to do our breakout rooms. So for those of you that are new, the breakout rooms are a place for us to all do a little quick meet and greet with each other. Spend about 2 minutes per person. Introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, maybe an interesting story, pass along to the next person, and then we'll close it up in about 5 to 6 minutes. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Oh, my breakout room. Catherine, do you see the breakout rooms at the bottom of your screen?
I do.
All right. Can you start that? Because I don't see it on my.
Got it.
Thank you. Hi, Ava.
Hey guys, good to see you. Sorry to be a stranger.
No problem. We're going to start the breakout rooms here.
Awesome.
Hello,
Hi.
I think our working group needs another hour.
We can make that happen.
Yeah, you can't
Too
keep
short,
just
too
adding
short.
more and more people to the groups and expect us to get done in the same amount of time.
Well, yeah, maybe one future meeting we'll just do a series of just the different breakouts. Actually, the new technology we're looking at, or we are going to use for the summit, which we're going to talk about soon, is has the ability to just shut a room and then do a little algorithm and shoot people to another room. So it's a pretty neat technology. All right. Well,
Dan, it was great to see that whole little blurb about you in the list report, man.
What was that?
Chris Stanton has a whole centerfold in the list report. Maybe that's not what it's called anymore. What is it called when you're in
Centerfold
article?
Centerfolds?
No,
Wearing clothes.
Centerfold.
I didn't even know that, Steve.
No,
No,
I'm pretty sure I saw that.
I
I don't know. Your face is
maybe-
everywhere these days, man. You're famous. You're everywhere. It's
maybe
hard
you were
to keep
just
up.
you were just dreaming that Steve.
That's what.
Well, this is a good segue because I was going to call on Chris next to give us a little update on what he's working on and keep us up to speed.
actually, it was a good segue out of the breakout room. Chuck was just talking about whether the move that we have seen where companies have pushed people into remote work based on this shock has been permanent or temporary. And so I think there is a really interesting question about what's going to happen after sort of the direct effects of COVID wane, and whether companies have learned how to make this structure that has now taken place during COVID more permanent, even when they have the option of moving people back into physical offices. I have written about this from one perspective using a survey early on that asked the owners of relatively small businesses whether they were going to go back to work in terms of business as usual or not. And from that, I found about 16% of the workforce would sort of continue to remain remote thereafter from this early sort of small business survey. The number that Chuck was just throwing around was something even higher than that. And that might mean that large businesses, now that they've figured it out and have paid the sunk costs of learning to operate in virtual teams, won't necessarily make the transition back. And I think as we've sort of all kind of been discussing issues around remote work for a while, we kind of think that the first step to utilizing open talent is to not have someone right next to you and having to interact with people digitally. That raises the question of what was happening before and what that means in terms of just the geographic dispersion of work. And so I think on the call last week, I said that I would share a map with you. And let's see, it looks like I can't share my screen, but if I can show you one or two exhibits, I think this is a pretty interesting pattern. So
Yeah.
I might have to become a co-host, which is frightening.
No, the host has to just go to the little green button at the bottom of the screen there for the host.
Okay.
And
You should
allow
be
him access.
should be good now.
Got it. And so I can't show you a map of the full US, and this is a little bit home biased. So this is the Northeast, and here in the Northeast, you can look at the proportion of individuals who were in computer and computer-related jobs who were working from home geographically. And basically what you end up seeing in the Northeast is that places around New York City were very sort of concentrated within office work. But as you move outside of major urban centers like New York or Boston, if you get up to Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, nice places to live or vacation land, people who are in computer related occupations like software engineers, front-end web designers, computer scientists, and the like, are much, much more likely to be remote. And so this 0.3, which is the lightest blue, is like 30% of the computer science software development workforce in these areas were working for companies that were sort of not co-located. These were remote workers. And you might be asking yourself, what does that mean in terms of their wages, or what does that mean in terms of their earnings, or are these people being paid like they live in rural New Hampshire, or are they being paid like for their talent? And it turns out that the answer to that question is maybe a little bit subtle. And the subtlety is that if you're a remote person and you live in San Francisco or New York or Boston or an expensive commuting zone, it's more likely that you're paid like someone who lives in New York, Boston, or an expensive commuting zone. And this is data from the census. So this is sort of a population average. I can't tell you anything about individual level stuff, but in this population average out of the census, if you live in these expensive commuting zones and you're a remote person who reports in the census that you work from home, you basically get paid like someone else who's a computer scientist in your local labor market. It's like the Yahoo folks who were working from home were the most senior engineers, and they got paid like regular Yahoo employees, and that was a Bay Area wage. However, if you're living in New Hampshire, which is a relatively low cost of living place, or if you're living in Boise, Idaho, which up until this boom was a relatively low cost of living place, it turns out you weren't paid like a Boise local or a New Hampshire local. You got sort of paid something like a combination of the San Francisco wage and the prevailing market wage for a software engineer. So it looks like there's this wage arbitrage across places that, or this cost of living arbitrage across places that allowed people to move out of expensive areas and to take advantage of lower cost of living. And so given that, and given that it seems like there is now the ability to have figured out this new way of working, I think that there are some pretty interesting questions about what that's going to mean for location choices going forward. If I had to speculate now, I would say that we will still see young people attracted to cities or attracted to relatively expensive urban areas because that's where they learn on the job and that's where they have some contact with others in the office, and that might facilitate some knowledge transmission. It also facilitates dating and finding a spouse. But I think that we'll probably see sort of an age profile that as people develop families or mature in their careers, that we may see some break with this desire to be co-located with relatively expensive urban areas like the New Yorks, Bostons, or San Franciscos of the world. And we're starting to see that now as firms are moving to new policies. I mean, of course, only time is going to tell. But if you look at these patterns just that predate COVID and predate this shock, you do see this pattern where people tend to be taking advantage of lower cost of living in their location choices when they're working remotely. So that's all I have today. I promised a map last week, and there's sort of the map that displays some of these trends.
Thanks, Chris. That's awesome. I don't mind seeing a map of New England. It reminds me of home, so appreciate that.
I've got a question for Chris. My team at Oxford has done some research on, urban-rural divide in salaries with people doing remote work via platforms. And they indeed find that if you look at the US, that rural people that do remote work make more money if they work via platform than if they would do that job, the average salary in that district. But it's one of the questions I raised, and this is work in progress. I think it's in the process of getting published. Is that we don't know if there's really like a development potential there to bring better skilled jobs to the countryside, or if these are people that have enjoyed a good education, moved to the city to get the jobs, and then once they had a job and were able to work remote, that they then move back to the countryside. Have you any insights
Yeah.
on that matter?
That's a great question. To try and disentangle some of that, I merged in migration patterns and looked at areas where people were more likely to be remote and still paid reasonably highly. And those tend to be areas where there's more migration from expensive, high-wage commuting zones into other areas. And so the place where remote work is most prevalent in the US, or was most prevalent in the US before the COVID crisis, was Boise, Idaho, which had tremendous migration flows from Silicon Valley and Seattle into Boise. I think there's an open question about whether, if you start hiring de novo from people who didn't have some of those connections in higher wage, more expensive places, which would have implied that in-office connection, whether we would sort of see the same effects. I think some of the training and onboarding questions, at least in terms of traditional companies, sort of remains an open question, at least in many of the conversations that I've had. That on one hand, people report that training and onboarding is a process that is lower friction because no one sort of has to be physically in the office at a given time. And if you're thinking about like a high-end software sales team where those people tend to be on the road 4 out of 5 days a week, training was difficult because those people, the experienced employees were just on a client site. And so you could train people remotely without ever having to require them to be in office. But at the same time, other companies are struggling with that, where some of the water cooler moments aren't happening with new employees, and it's hard to figure out who to talk to on a remote type of training environment.
Thanks. Super interesting data you have.
Anybody have any questions for Chris or Greta before we move on?
I'd like
Comments?
to just add some comment to Chris's story. I put in the chat about the real estate sales in July in Canada being year over year 46% higher than they've ever had. So it's the highest sales ever. They cited 3 reasons for that. One of them is the lowest interest rates in history. Secondly, there was kind of a pent up demand because they hadn't been able to buy for a while during the COVID crisis. But the third one was that they had learned that they could work differently, and they learned that they could move to other areas where they could afford to buy and combine those 3 things. So I think that data is going to be interesting as we see that come up over the next sort of big real estate period, which is the fall out here. But I think year over year, you're going to see these people just moving to where they can afford based on the fact that they know they're not going to have to commute now.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Just a quick question there. We all talk in logic and science and causality and impact, right? But there is the overhang of politics on all of this. Did you notice any of that in like, for example, I was talking to a colleague in London, and they are already back to offices. They're already going to client sites. And it's not as though London had any worse of a COVID situation that we had in San Francisco. We had actually much better situation. So it doesn't feel like the logic of when to go to work and when to stay at home, when to be remote is isolated to the outcomes of work versus also the prevailing politics of it. Any impact, any perspective to that?
I might open that one up. That hasn't been sort of the types of conversations that I've had, because I'm like bury your head in the sand causality types of questions are the ones that I tend to focus on, but I'm sure other people have had conversations that are closer to that.
Okay.
I'd say in London people aren't actually going back to work. Maybe some of the guys are, but it's still low. It's still really low.
Can I just jump in a second? Balaji, I'm encountering exactly what you're describing right here. So I work in the oil and gas and energy space, and that's quite a traditional industry. And there currently is a focus for people to return to work where it's safe to do so. and people are actively being encouraged to return to the office as governments and states open up and allow that to happen. It's a really interesting situation to be in, because obviously there's been this large period of time where it's been proven that remote work is possible, and platforms and collaboration have been driven during that time.
Thank you.
To your point, Balaji, about the sort of political layer, I think there's another layer that would be interesting to look at, and somebody just raised it in the chat, which is the connectivity layer as well. I mean, 2 years ago, we would be even 2 years ago, we'd be in a completely different situation just with bandwidth. And 2 years from now, when 5G is actually, well, maybe it's a bit longer now, then 5G is actually implemented, we'll be in another completely different position and experience in terms of work from home. And it'd be an interesting overlay to sort of look at maybe even New Hampshire, Chris, and look at what that looks like against bandwidth, for example, and just see if there's any correlation.
I think it's even bigger than that. If Elon Musk's satellite StarNet ring is successful, that means possible broadband for everybody. That means 3.5 billion people on the planet who don't have broadband today will have broadband. So I think that that's going to open it up enormously.
Any indication of what the justification is for drawing back people back into an office environment as opposed to remaining remote?
Oh, great question, Alan.
There are a bunch of studies that attempt to look at differences in the effectiveness of face-to-face versus virtual communication. And at least my mental model of this is that face-to-face communication tends to confer advantages at the beginning of a relationship. So almost every company that is a fully remote company that I have ever studied does something to where new employees have some type of face-to-face interaction with veteran employees relatively early on in their tenure. And having some sort of central office, at least for a subgroup, is probably a pretty strong justification to recreate some of those relationships. The remote companies that do this tend to do this through retreats or through bringing new people into the homes or co-locating them with veteran employees early on. But I think there is at least some rationale for thinking that face-to-face meetings tend to help those who are in their teams.
It is
Chris,
interesting
have you
to watch
seen any? Chris, have you seen any correlation in any of your research with employee engagement and organizations that allow the choice to work remotely?
Engagement is hard to measure. I know work hours have...
From a cultural perspective, I mean employee engagement, along the lines of the way Gallup measure it.
I don't know about the engagement question. I know about work hours questions. So I know the number of meetings have increased. The average time per meeting has tended to fall. And people are working more, but it's likely because they're avoiding a 1 hour commute round trip.
Oren, I can add a little bit to that. I know I've been studying at least the Gallup surveys. And again, as we know, till COVID hit, employee engagement scores for employees have been plummeting for a long time. I think they went down 14% in the last 5 years or so. But again, during COVID, they actually shot back up because there's suddenly this increased emphasis on the employee, on their safety, on their well-being, a negative impetus on contractors. So there is this refocusing on staff that has happened also because for two reasons in my mind is people that were left behind felt more valuable than people that were laid off. So it's a very complex calculation on what drives the employee engagement score, which is when you're trying to create a causality to remote or in person, isolating all of these other variables is very difficult.
Balaji, if you've got any research you can share on that, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Okay.
Steve, did you have a comment?
I was just going to emphasize, I think it's going to come down to the economics, right? It's the shift has started. There's still traditionalists that believe that the only real way people can work together is in person, and there's still validity to that. But when your competitor doesn't go back and starts to sell their buildings and starts to gain all of that financial advantage of remote, you know, I think the dynamic's going to change. So I think there's real economics at play here, and those economics haven't necessarily kicked in yet, right? Because everyone's still holding onto their properties. So this is a multi-year shift, and it'll be interesting to see if organizations are putting that all into their calculus as to going back. What are their competitors doing? What's the advantage? What are the gains? So interesting to watch.
Good point. Okay. Thanks for that, everybody. We're moving on. We're gonna get a working group update on the organization that we are putting together. So first, I'll call on Brian for an update on the credentialing platforms.
I was told there would be no math, so I have prepared no questions per se. So anyway, yeah, so we're having our first meeting tomorrow. I've been reaching out to all of the people in the work group. This is on the credentialing survey. I've prepared a credentialing work group. I prepared a brief survey for everyone to start to identify some of the basic tenets of, you know, what defines good, what is important to people, what do you think are things that differentiate successful programs and platforms from other ones. Brandon, do you have that survey link available to share?
I can pull it up here in a minute. It may not.
I'll go ahead and get the link and just throw it out just for the sake of time. I'll put that over that.
Perfect.
From there, that'll start to build the narrative around which dimensions we will measure to create an algorithm that we can evaluate and come up with some sort of around which the credentialing will work. And we'll have an update on what those responses are, what those findings are next week. My goal is to have some working examples of what an algorithm might be within the month. So we should be ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and put the link up in just a second.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Okay, next up is Mary with an update on the playbook. Mary with us? She may not be on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Okay, so we just had our second call prior to this discussion and had some really good dialogue around the personas we wanted to have or solve for, as well as what the scope was. And where we landed is that the real gap or need for the playbook is a getting started guide, not a what's the playbook for running this at scale, but how does an organization go from being completely internal to identifying and diagnosing opportunities to leverage open talent? What does that experimentation process look like before they scale more broadly? So we are going to focus on that scope very narrowly. I do want to connect with, it as part of this initial iteration, I do want to connect with the marketing and communications team. We're probably going to be doing some storyboarding around what that whole decision journey looks like and what the value proposition, et cetera, is, and want to make sure we're leveraging any synergies and not being duplicative in any manner.
Great, that's great. Yeah, and if anybody wants to get involved with any of these groups, we'll put the link to the work streams in the chat, or you could email myself and we can get you involved. Mark, enterprise education and certification.
Yes, great, thank you. Actually, before I just go on to that, I'll just draw people's attention. Some of you have probably seen a piece in Fast Company which talks about GitLab and the way in which it's been trying to recreate some of the sort of water cooler moments. Given that, you know, it's a business that was born remote, it's perhaps got a head start on that. But I just scanned it earlier on today. I would recommend that to all of you. And one other point, Balaji, I think in response to your piece about the sort of employee engagement piece, I think that there may be a case, which is that leaders in organizations have had to work harder whilst their employees have been remote, and that in some ways that might mean that they've had to be more present than they would necessarily have been if they'd been in the office, and that there may be a kind of knock-on effect there, which is that, you know, people feel that they're getting more attention, people feel that they're being listened to, and, you know, have the ear of leadership in perhaps a way that they haven't necessarily, and that might be one factor which is contributing to that spike in engagement. Brandon, back to your question. We've kind of got two tracks going on, one of which is looking at definitions. It's looking at buy-side or demand perspectives and some reference frameworks. And Jeff, Chuck, and Brian have been working on that. And I think they had a second meeting on that yesterday. Chris and I had a fantastic half-an-hour conversation yesterday. We were talking about some of the frequently asked questions. We were thinking about case studies and customer journeys. And we talked about some of the factors that are perhaps likely to contribute to success. And in that context, we talked about the fact that where the objective is to find some more sort of transformational solution, that is perhaps the environment in which an open solution is likely to be more successful, versus something where, you know, the objective is really something more incremental, and that is perhaps a less likely area for success. And so we're going to try and sort of build that out. We've got another meeting for the whole of the group on Monday, and I'm hoping that we might have something to share in terms of sort of work in progress this time next week.
Thank you. Thank you. Great stuff. All right. San, business model. Am I saying that right?
San, yeah. Hey, so we had a pretty profound conversation this week, which Alice is going to kind of recap in a sec. But beforehand, just want to say thank you to the community, actually, because I think you'll remember, like last week, we put a shout out just to say we really felt we needed to have a gender balanced team. And I'm happy to say that we, within 2 hours, did. And it's already had, I think, you could just immediate effect. The richness of our conversation, our thinking, was a testament to that. So I encourage everyone to make sure that they've got balance in their teams. That being said, Alistair, are you around?
I'm here, just confirming you. Yep, I'm here, Son.
Over to you, my friend.
Very good.
He's going to share a screen as well, Brandon. So
I will. Thank you very much. So our feedback is quite concise and short. I think, apologies for this. Framework 1, I just want to open this with you guys and then share and play. So last week, Son went through Framework 0. We've moved on from that into Framework 1, and we'll just show some basic differences. It's quite straightforward and simple, I think. Let's see. The conversation that we had last week with the rest of the group was around the problem that we are solving. We've grown our team, and we basically had a look at the manifesto and wanted to understand what is the one sentence that we are solving for worldwide. And we kept on coming back to the story of, are we helping 1 billion people? And that was the question we asked last week. And our purpose, we saw the massive transformative purpose in the manifesto, and we wanted to link the problem we're solving to the purpose, and the rest of the items we went through already, which makes me move to this very simple slide. We need to decide on a business model which is going to be designed on either scarcity or abundance. And this has a super big impact on the way that we design everything we do around the world, because scarcity will be the Mad Max future, and that might be dystopian, or you can go for the abundance option, which is kind of like Star Trek and just better. And where we kind of leaned towards yesterday was the abundance option. The debate summarized in one sentence was, will you have a scarcity of jobs on the left, which is dystopian, or will we create abundance for 1 billion people around the world that didn't have access to abundance? So we now understand that what we need to design for the future of humanity will be based on these two areas. And we don't have the answer, but we're putting our summary of where our headspace is at. And we're going to invite some conversation and feedback from the rest of the work streams in terms of input and thoughts around that. It doesn't have to be tonight. I'm going to open it up quite quickly. But these are two massive topics that determine how the next decade works in terms of what we will design together. And then two things that weren't clear to us. So we're new and we're allowed to ask these questions, I think. Like, what is the one sentence of the problem statement that we are solving so that we can connect all of the work streams together and then design what we need to do in the dimensions of the business model. So our team took a stab yesterday and we had about 8 different points of view. All of them are relevant, but we need to nail that down so that we can connect between the different work streams. And then who is buying us and whose problem are we solving? So I think those are two major topics we want to cover off. And then the last point I want to cover off, which is a little bit busy, but on the left-hand side, even though there's quite a bit of stuff on this page, we are trying to show where we are headed in the future and how we think this work stream is going to work, and we're exposing it on purpose. On the left-hand side, you'll see number 1, when we solve the problem statement, for example, we provoked the thought of, are we helping 1 billion people in the next decade to have access to abundance that do not have access to that right now? And if we are doing so, on the right-hand side, number 2, who are the customers? When we understand that, then what is the value proposition? There is a purpose behind the numerics that we've put here as a team, because it doesn't mean we're right. It's just our first thought process in terms of how we want to arrange ourselves and maybe work with the other work streams. So we're going to invite comment and then share this with the rest of the group, and then see what you guys think about that. Like I said, we're trying to put a placemat on the table to see, like, how do we find commonality between all of the work streams and how do we connect? And we're only starting with item number 1 on the left and item number 2 on the right. So the problem statement in 1 or 2 sentences on the right, who are we helping worldwide for the next decade? And I think that that's kind of where we landed. There was some quite good insights that one of our team members, Eric, pulled out in terms of he wished the world to look a little bit different. And I want to call on his point of view before I close and say thank you. But that's kind of where we landed as a team. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great work, everybody. Next up, marketing communications. Ashley, any updates from your crew?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And there's a lot of themes here too, I think, with the marketing work stream in particular. We certainly don't want to operate in our own silo. Mary and some of the other groups have talked about, we need to make sure that all of our work streams are aligned with the buyer personas and the customer journey, right? So that we're not operating within our work streams with a different approach or a different focus when it comes to who our audience is. And that was one of the dialogues that the marketing team had around, Andy said, it's not a binary choice. We have to look at demand and supply holistically. So we had a great conversation around that. And even within the demand side, Paul made a great point. We've got the hiring manager, TA, we've got finance. They all bring their own opinions and perspectives to the table. So I think one of the challenges is going to be not only for the marketing work stream, but for us as a whole, as we're highlighting these customer stories and these use cases, which buyer personas do we have in mind? So I foresee that being a challenge for us, but certainly the greatest opportunity. And forgive me because some folks have joined the marketing work stream and expressed interest after, like more recently. So we're looking to have our next call in the next week or so to bring the entire group together. But so those are some of the themes we talked about. You know, the overall goal for our work stream in particular is to create that marketing strategy that tells those stories, those customer stories. Number one, that educate organizations about the impact of open talent models. Number two, stories that empower them to adopt open talent model strategies. And number three, stories that teach them how to remove friction in that process. So our next steps are really not only to integrate with some of the other work streams. Mary, you certainly, you know, we'd love to align on the customer persona and buying journey. So next steps are to integrate with some of the other work streams, what you guys are doing, and then also really focus on who are those customer stories that we need to tell. And that's going to start with leaning on this group to identify what use cases we can sort of bring out and extrapolate and highlight.
Great, thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna chime in for the governance update. And apologies, I'll be reading a little bit from John's notes, but they've engaged the law firm. They're drafting the initial 501c6 documents, and we're going to distribute those as soon as they're clean and ready to go for, I believe, a meeting that's coming up on Tuesday. We've landed on the name, the Center for the Transformation of Work, and we're working on all the things that go along with that. Key activities. The main activities to start with the organization, the accreditation of platforms, education, including certification, advocacy, and awareness. And then we'll be looking at setting up the 501c3 and working on setting that up for foundation money for future projects. And then we've also talked about 3 different levels of membership to fund the organization. Founding members, which would be about 8 to 10 companies. There would also be an advisory board. We'd also have a membership for folks on the demand side and accreditation members for the supply side. We're working on basing these 2 memberships on revenues for companies to ensure that everyone has equal access to the organization. So that's the update on governance. Are there any working groups that I missed, or anybody have anything else to add? No? Okay, great. So moving on, we've got about 9 more minutes, and Catherine is going to touch on the upcoming event. So I'll let her grab the mic.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Mark. I saw you wanted an update in the chat. So if everyone wants to mark their calendars, for those that don't know already, we'll be sending out a save the date. We've decided on the dates of Monday, October 12th through Wednesday, October 14th for the event. And so just at a high level, just to give everyone an idea of the schedule, on Monday evening, we'll be hosting a cocktail hour of some kind and a kickoff for the event. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll have about a 4-hour blocked window, very likely between about 11 a.m. and 3 Eastern time, for the actual content of the event on October 13th and 14th. So on the first day, just a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're basically going to be talking about why transform work, and we'll have a keynote. We will have some academic insights, and then we'll do a session on creating the right culture with a couple of panels. And then on day 2, which is, well, really it's day 3 if you count the first day with the cocktail hour, on Wednesday, October 14th, we're going to be having 2 panels on creating the right organization, and then 2 panels on finding the right partners. And then we'll do a wrap up. So we're really just trying to cover all the bases on what folks need to do to understand what open talent all has to offer, and how an organization would go through a lot of the steps of learning how to bring that into your organization. So we have a lot of ideas for these panels, and we'll be reaching out, and Brandon has some more information about that to share as well. And then the next topic we'd like to talk about with you guys is our working groups. Oh, we're not calling them working groups, I apologize. We're calling them breakout groups. So at the event, we're gonna have 3 different options of time, 3 different time blocks, where essentially it's gonna be like roundtable discussions at a real event, where you can choose to go into a breakout room with a particular person on a particular topic. And so we're gonna have a list of all these breakout rooms. And so through the course of the 3 days, we'll have blocked out time where we say, anyone that wants to join a breakout room, feel free to click one of these links, and you basically go into that breakout room and learn about that topic and have an opportunity to speak with that particular person that's leading that room. So we'll have a block of time on Tuesday for those, and then we'll have 2 blocks of time on Wednesday for those as well. So we're really trying to make the event you know, more like this, where we have a lot of time to hear from experts in their field and on these particular topics, and then also still have a lot of time for people to communicate, collaborate, ask questions, and share what they know with each other, because all of you on this call have brought so much to the table. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to share with lots of new folks that we bring into the event. So that's kind of the deal with the event overall. October 12th through the 14th. As far as pricing, everyone that's coming to these calls will be offered some kind of a discount. We'll share more on the tickets next week, and we will have the website up, we're hoping by the end of next week, so folks can purchase tickets. And I think that's about it.
Button. Did you want to, were we going to mention the Google Doc where people could put in some theme ideas?
Sure, absolutely. So for the breakout rooms that we do the day of the conference, we'd really like to get people's input on ideas for what some of those breakout rooms could be. Ideally, what we'll have is we'll have folks from each panel conversation of the event leaving a room so that folks can talk to the panelists themselves. And then because we hope to have enough attendees, we'd like to have, you know, a whole bunch of breakout rooms that even folks on these calls might want to lead. So if you have an idea for what one of those rooms topics could be, we'd love for you to think about it and add it to this document that I just put in the chat. Lots of the topics that we've even talked about so far on our weekly calls would probably be relevant.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, please feel free to go to that Google Doc and add in some themes. Even if you had an idea for a theme and you go to the doc and you see it there, maybe put a +1 or something like that. Add any notes you want to that. It'll be kind of a working document for us to shape those breakout rooms. Anybody have any questions on the event that we could answer?
Yeah, have you got thoughts in terms of the timing? So I know 12th, 13th, 14th. I'm just wondering on what time of the day for the various different regions.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's going to be challenging to get everyone around the globe involved, but we're going to try to do it similar to when we have these calls. So like 9 a.m. Mountain Time through 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And we're going to be working with our technology provider to try to come up with some solutions to get maybe some folks from Australia involved. Maybe they could get involved during their working hours. Just while we're all asleep, they can chime in on documents, or we might even have the ability for people to do pre-recorded sessions. Like, so Freelancer, for example, Jesse Arundel down at Commonwealth Bank of Australia, he's a member of our group, and you maybe get him involved some way where he could record something and we could show it on demand type of thing. So
yeah, it'll be good to examine and explore to see if if there are 2 sessions in parallel where people in the US could participate in a global session at a time that is convenient to everybody. And so right now it feels like, okay, this is going to be the session you can participate. I've seen a few global conferences where they seem to have more, you're using the potential and ability to be remote. You could actually have different session in different time zones. I'd love for us to explore that.
Great idea. Okay. Awesome. And then just to wrap it up on the event, we obviously have some sponsorship opportunities. We're very thankful to Deloitte for being the title sponsor of the event. But we have the opportunity for someone to sponsor this kickoff happy hour that we're doing on the October 12th, which is going to be really fun. We've got some really neat ideas that we're working on, and then obviously being able to sponsor different panel discussions as well as the breakout rooms. So again, if anybody's interested in that, we do have a sponsorship deck ready to go, and we can share that with anybody.
Please share.
We'll do. And that is a wrap. Jin, are you on? I know you said you might join late.
He actually emailed he can't join.
Okay. He was going to give us a quick update. I know they've got a new report out that I'll send in the next email to everybody, as well as their AI and enterprise talks have been amazing. So we'll share the link to those upcoming events as well, so you can all have access to those. So anybody have any last minute comments before we wrap things up?
Thanks for all the hard work.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Jack.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Huge
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks, Brandon and Catherine. You guys are great.
I'll get a better hat next time.
Brandon, one last comment from us. We're just going to post a link to capture everyone's thoughts on the problem statement. It's going to go up right now, so if everyone could just grab that link before they bounce off. Alistair's going to put it up right now.
Great. I'll leave this call on for a few seconds more before we end it. And if you want to send me that link too, I'll make sure it gets.
Okay, we'll do that.
Out to our group too.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thanks.
Sean.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hope to see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.